I think you can go ahead and get started.
Okay. Okay, we're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Welcome, everybody, to our virtual Sustainability Board meeting. We have an agenda, which we usually jump right into, but I just want to welcome 3 new board members. So we have James Carlson joining. Do you go by Jim or James?
Jim.
Jim. Hi, Jim.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you.
We also have Olivia Eskandel.
Hi there, I'm here.
Hi, welcome.
Hi guys.
Hi, glad to have you. And Terry Willingham. Hi, Terry.
Hi, I'm here.
Hi. So just a sort of point of process, are we going to be able to do video, or would we have to add everyone to panelists, Julie?
I added everyone on the board as a panelist.
Okay, so you can join by video if you sort of go to the bottom and click on. So your choice. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to skip the Pledge of Allegiance today that we normally have on the agenda and go right to public comments. Are there any public comments for anyone joining via Facebook streaming? And would that come through the chats, Julie? Oh, go off mute real quick.
I was just wondering that myself. I'm not really sure if we're on live or not. I don't know if it works.
You are on live. I just checked.
Oh, great.
So we're on live, but if you get participants that are not panel members that raise their hand, then that would be the public comment. So if you have anybody who is now watching that's not a panelist, then you would have to unmute them and call on their name.
Okay.
So Julie, are you mostly going to track that? I may miss that.
Yeah, I'll track that.
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, so let's go to staff update. Hey, Nick.
Yes.
Hello, how are you?
Good. I was just making sure the Facebook Live was working as well. So staff update. First want to welcome all the new board members. And the staff update, we're going to start with our informational items. The Brevard Sustainability Working Group virtually hosted the Sustainability Summit this year and split it into 2 parts. With all the COVID going on, being virtual was really important to making this happen. The first part of this was called Optimizing Your Board, a Sustainable Approach, and that was held on June 5th. That was Friday, 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. Jennifer, you were there. There were a number of other board members from around the county that attended. It went pretty well as a first virtual summit. The second part of that, which I invite all of our board members to attend and any other board members from other cities as well to attend, is going to be called Communicating Sustainability Principles, Goals, and Processes. And this will be on Friday, July 10th from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. And if you need the links to that, it should be provided in the information that Julie gave out as part of the staff report. Or if anybody needs any questions on these kinds of things, they can always email me for the new board members. Secondly, we were awarded the KBB grant for planting a forest in front of City Hall for Gail Meredith. It's the Seaside Forest for Gail Meredith, in partner with the Indian River Lagoon Coalition, the Brevard Indian River Lagoon Coalition, and other community members. After talking with KBB and a number of the partners, we're going to probably push this to after hurricane season. It's not a problem with KBB. I wanted to run this by the board and make sure that it's okay with the board before I put in the formal request to extend it. But just because of hurricane season coming up and our availability for volunteers and getting this done on time, we can actually get this done after hurricane season. That's my recommendation. Also, the next thing is a planting day, which was planned for this Saturday, June 27th from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. as part of the DeSoto Parkway Stormwater Enhancement Project. However, there's some delays this week with COVID being an issue. However, if there are a number of people that are available to do this and they would like to email me back with availability, let me know. I'll be emailing board members regularly when we do have planting days. and I'll add our new 3 members to that list. Lastly, as far as informational items go, the Recreation Department has created a variety of summer camps and programs that are available for kids in the community. Please share this with friends, family members, and kids you know in the area. I myself will be hosting one of them entitled Tomorrowland, Creating the City of the Future. This is going to be a way to get kids involved with the different parts of a city, how they work, how they function together. A Civics 101 through fun educational activities. We'll be using the SimCity platform to teach them about this and having some guest speakers come in. And if there's any questions about that, please feel free to ask. Last but not least, future topics and special presentations. This is something that we do periodically. All the older board members know this, and for the new board members, we typically have speakers that come in. If there are any topics of speakers that you are interested in, please, let Julie, myself know what you're interested in. We can reach out to individuals in the community to get these people to come in and present on different topics. I would recommend that they coincide with the Green Achievement Targets as part of our Sustainability Action Plan. If there are any other questions about these future topics and presentations, let me know. We can brainstorm ideas and come up with some really great speakers. There's a few different groups that are creating content in the community right now that we can piggyback on. Eastern Central Florida Regional Planning Council is one that are focusing mostly on civic engagement and equity, making sure that everybody understands the issues involving equity and personal bias when it comes to presenting information. That's pretty much all I have right now. I included in my staff report, as always, other community meetings at a glance. If you'd like to take a look at those and join some of these groups or meetings and be informed, recommend doing that. And again, welcome to James, Olivia, and Terry. Welcome to the board.
Great, thanks, Nick.
I'll take any questions.
Yeah, did any board members, Nick was asking if we were okay as a board to push the planting from the Gail Meredith funds to after hurricane season, and also for any topics, does anyone have any issue with pushing that timeline? You always have to wait a few more seconds even because of the muting. So yeah, I think it's a good idea. I want them to be able to have their best chance to take root. And topic wise, just building on that, I think in the fall, after hurricane season, we always have stuff around composting and native plants. It's the beginning of gardening season for this area. It'd be great to capitalize on that and maybe layer some topics. I think around the Gail Meredith planting effort, and also what we usually try to do around composting and native plants. And then the equity thing that you mentioned that the Brevard Sustainability Working Group is doing, it would be great to bring that here also, what Linda and folks had done with that group. It was a great presentation.
Right, the BSWG did do the equity training as well, and the Eastern Central Florida Regional Planning Council Education TAC is also teaming up with a few different webinar services that will be available to board members in the future.
Great.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah. So board members, there's also the chat that we have. So you can just if a topic, comes to mind, we just put in the chat. I kind of like that feature actually. Okay, so now we are moving on, and our very own city manager, Courtney Barker, has a presentation on climate resiliency policy ordinance. Are you ready for that, Courtney?
Yes, let me try to figure out how to do the video real quick. Okay, I'm on video. You guys can see me? And I'm gonna share the screen. So, where is it?
I think right in the middle.
Where's I have my presentation pulled up. So, give me 1 second. I'm trying to figure out how to share the screen real quick. I have the presentation pulled up on the screen, and I'm not sure why it's not showing up on the shared screen.
Is it when you say share screen, is it giving you a lot of options like window? Oh, there you go.
Yeah, can you see the presentation now?
You can see, yes.
Okay, excellent. So now let me put it in presentation mode. Okay. So we have a lot of new board members, and I wanted to, kind of give a background of what the city has been doing with climate change from the start. And just as a preamble too, just let you know, since I'm home, I'm outside because I have 3 children. So if you hear any barking or, fire trucks going by, that's why. But the city has a long history of climate change work. And I want to go through all of that and then kind of give you a background of the comprehensive plan and what that means to us. And I'm really wanting to get the sustainability board involved in our climate change work, especially when it comes to policy and implementation, because there's such a connection between sustainability and climate change and resiliency. And so I kind of look at it very simplified as resiliency is looking at the impacts and how do we deal with that, and sustainability is how do we mitigate and even stall the impacts of climate change. So there's an obvious connection with the board and what we're doing with the all of our climate change work. A lot of the work that I would like you to all start doing has to do with growth management as well. And so this is kind of a preamble to, to get you started in reviewing a lot of the policies that we're creating as a city, but also to start really getting you to think about how growth management influences climate change and how climate change is influencing our environmental systems. So on the call, you have Thomas Rupert, who is an attorney with Florida Sea Grant. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, they were instrumental in creating these policies. And when I say they, I say Florida Sea Grant. We partnered with Stetson University and so on, and I'm going to go through all that. But Thomas is on the line, so he can explain some of the things that, that even I can't, because that's the climate change, is literally what he does every day. So he's a great resource, and we're very fortunate that he's on the call tonight to help you through this. So without further ado, I'm going to just go ahead and get started. We began looking at sea level rise in 2010, and this is actually, it was really 2009 when we started, and we ended it in 2010 with a sea level rise adaptation report, and that was conducted by R.W. Parkinson, Inc., and that's really Randy Parkinson, and I think some of you may know him. He's a very well-known environmentalist here in Brevard County. And this was a very, first blush at what sea level rise impacts to, sorry, my dog just shook water off his, but what sea level rise effects could happen in the city of Satellite Beach. And this was done, over 10 years ago. It was done with a bathtub model, which basically throws all the data into one model and, just sees what happens. And it was to assess our vulnerabilities to sea level rise. That report, and I'll just give you some anecdotal information. When I was not working with the city at the time, I was actually working with the city of Titusville as the planning director there. And I remember looking in the news and I saw that Satellite Beach was looking at sea level rise, and I thought to myself, what on earth are they doing? So even as a planner at that point, I thought it was interesting that the city of Satellite Beach was looking at it. And so you can imagine what the general public thought at that point in time, that the city was, the city got a lot of criticism and was quite frankly made fun of for even looking at this at the time. And now the city is considered a leader in this field. And this kind of gives you a timeline of all of the work that we have done. And a lot of that has had to do with the grants that the city's received and being able to do these analysis and come up with, you know, policy and moving into what we're now into really is implementation. And a lot of that has to do with the work that the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council has done. And I have to say, if it wasn't without their leadership, we wouldn't be where we are today, because they literally have written our grants for us. The first one we received was, you know, obviously with the Climate Ready Estuaries Pilot Project. And then we received another one with the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity, which was a Community Resiliency Initiative grant. Then we went on to get a Florida Department of Environmental Coastal Partnership Community grant. And then we also, we were one of the first communities in the state of Florida to adopt an adaptation action area into our comprehensive plan. And I'll explain what, you know, the significance of the comprehensive plan is later in the presentation. We also already adopted comprehensive plan policies in 2016. And then after that, in 2016, we partnered with Stetson University and Florida Sea Grant to create the project that we're going to talk about this evening. So back in 2014 and 2015, we did get the FDEP Coastal Partnership Initiative grant. And we held our first public workshop in 2014. This was a year after I started working with the city, and we sent notices to every property address in the city of Satellite Beach. And we sent out notices on the city manager Facebook page, and NPR actually did an article about what we were doing. And I remember I had some residents say that, okay, you know, we made NPR, so I'm a fan for life of the city of Satellite Beach. But it was pretty amazing the amount of interest that came out of this meeting. What was even more interesting about that meeting is we had a deluge, I guess you could call, like a normal rainstorm now. But this is what the entrance to the Schechter Center looked like the day before the meeting. In fact, we had to shut down Jackson Avenue at that corner of Jackson Avenue and South Patrick, because the river was so high and it was backing up into the stormwater drains and flooding that intersection, and nobody could pass it. We had a couple cars break down, you know, trying to get through it. So it was an interesting timing, because, you know, we had, during that point in I guess you could call it history now, there were many people in the community that were very critical of even the idea of climate change. And if we said the words climate change, you know, we had a lot of naysayers and very critical people at the meeting. And as you can see, the way we advertised it, we wanted to make sure that we were never concerned about using the words climate change, because that is what we're dealing with. And we didn't want to sugarcoat it or call it anything different. This is the issue that we were dealing with today, and let's just work through it. So that grant paid for what we call the sketch planning tool with DOT, and that was using a mean high water in a U.S. Army Corps of Engineer low, intermediate, and high projective rate curves. And I am not by any means a technical person, so if you have a lot of questions on the model, I will not be the person to answer those questions, but this is what the model showed. And I'm going to only show you the high curve, because when we went to the Planning Council and we had to adopt a low, medium, or high curve to base our data and our decisions on, the Planning Advisory Board ended up agreeing that let's use the high, because why would we plan for anything but the worst? And so it was their decision to use the high projection curve. And what's interesting now is that these curves at the high level are starting to pan out as being the reality. This is what 2070 looks like, or is projected to look like. And this is 2100. And this is just sea level rise. And there's a difference between that and the maps I'm going to show you later, because the Stutson project was quite different. This is a storm surge and erosion analysis. And you can see that, you know, our storm surge is one of the issues that we deal with as a community every hurricane. And you can see the beach erosion projects or beach nourishment projects that, you know, are constantly happening to mitigate some of that. And then we had the public workshop, and these issues and strategies that were developed during that workshop fed into a larger public participation survey that we did. And so you can see that there were some members of the community that attended the meeting that didn't feel like we should do anything at all, that this was a hoax. It was, we had one member who was saying it was, you know, a UN conspiracy. And then we also had a lot, I would say with the vast majority of people attending the meeting felt that we needed to focus on moving utilities underground, growing the tax base away from high hazard areas, having better beach restoration, and then go green. And this had a lot of influence in creating the sustainability board and plan that we have today. We talked about some of the issues that we have to deal with, which was our zoning ordinances, some of the impediments to creating better buildings, beach erosion, cost of living has always been an issue here, saltwater intrusion into our utilities, being able to continue generating revenue so that we can continue building our capital needs. And then you can see the last two were the influence of the people that attended the meeting that didn't think that this was a big deal at all. The underground utilities was a big deal, maintaining a healthy beach and dune system, because beach erosion is without a doubt the most visible climate change impact that people see right now. And then also getting a tax base into lower risk areas. So basically moving our tax base into areas that aren't so critical. And that had a lot to do with beach renourishment. Let's retreat back from the beach, and then creating more access to the river, encouraging renewable energy, and getting just bigger stormwater pipes. A lot of our residents really wanted us to engineer our way out of it. And you'll see that reflected in a lot of the strategies that we're going to show you tonight. This is what the city online survey looked like. It's very, very graphic. It was very easy to take. You could get through it in 15 minutes. We sent this survey out through Facebook. We sent it out through all of our mailing lists. And then we bought a bunch of tablets and had them at events all over the city. We had them at the Ocean Reef Beach Festival. We had them at the Schechter Center for parents that are bored waiting for their kids to get out of dance class. So we really worked very hard to get a good sample of residents responding to this. And this is an example of what the survey talks about. So if people thought that coastal erosion was a vulnerability that they were concerned about, we asked them, well, what strategies do you think would best help? And this is an example of the slide: armoring, dune protection, beach renourishment, redirect development. And then, of course, we had, because of the input that we got at the meeting, we added the no action, don't do anything at all. We don't think it's a big deal. So we wanted to make sure that we respected the opinions of the residents that did attend, that didn't think it was a big deal, and reflect that in a survey so we could get really a good understanding of what people thought. We got 479 validated City of Satellite Beach respondents, and that was a very important thing for us to make sure that they actually lived here. We made sure that the IP address that they used couldn't be used more than once. So we wanted to make sure that we had, you know, a good sample. And I'm sure there were residents out there that figured out how to way to get around that. There always is, but you know, this is with today's technology, the best way to get to people. And and these are the questions that we primarily asked. These were the top 10 strategies that came out of that survey. And, so the first is to work with utilities to determine the feasibility of moving full mountain utilities underground, plant native coastal vegetation, install larger drainage pipes and structures as the system undergoes maintenance, increase construction setbacks from the shoreline, implement policies to direct development away from high-risk areas, implement policies to direct development away from high-risk areas with regard to storm surge. And that, you would think that matters on only the ocean, but there is storm surge on the riverside as well. So when we separated those two, because people, when they get the maps and see that most of the flooding is coming from the river, storm surge from the river is also a concern. And also, the city taking action to reduce property owners' premium for National Flood Insurance Program. And that, what's interesting is a lot of residents don't really understand the National Flood Insurance Program. And if we try to reduce their premiums, you're basically encouraging them to live in high-risk areas. So you can see some of the not understanding and not being educated on those programs. And then installing vaults for stormwater storage and reuse for non-potable water, such as irrigation during construction. So basically changing our LDRs to encourage better construction and better stormwater management, promote rooftop solar, and then also moving critical utilities to higher ground. And that includes, there's a lot of utilities that go beyond power, such as, lift stations and so on. So all of that plays into the response from the residents. So in 2016, we received the Florida Sea Grant, and this was a very big project, the biggest one that we've done. This is like a $300,000 grant that we received, and that included hazardous modeling of the city, and then also mapping all the critical infrastructure in the city. That alone is a huge endeavor. Hazardous modeling is basically looking at not just sea level rise flooding itself, but also looking at what would the city look like during a Cat 3 storm with sea level rise taken into account. And that is very important because sea level rise and climate change are two different terms, and there is a reason. Climate change describes a lot more things going on than just sea level rise. It includes heat, increased storm activity. There's the uncertainty of the weather is a big deal now, and I think we're all seeing that, the deluges that we have, and not just hurricanes. We're talking just regular storms. So how does that impact our critical infrastructure? Where is our critical infrastructure? And so what is the elevation of those pipes? Are our pipes sitting in water? Are our stormwater pipes sitting in water? How is sea level rise affecting sewer lines? So that is, the things that we really looked at. And then we also created policies for addressing all of this critical infrastructure. And that is some of the policies that we're going to go over with you tonight. This is what this modeling looked at. So if you look at the flood hazard zones for FEMA, it's a lot different than the flood hazard zones of the hazard model in 2040. So you can see it today and then in 2040. So this, I don't want to scare everybody, but this is what happens during a major storm in 2040 is what we're saying. So this, when we're looking at sea level rise only, just normal. Oops, I don't know why that did that. This is where all of our city facilities are. And so when you're looking at it from a city standpoint, we began, when we're looking at for example, Public Works is a good one. And we address the fire station too. At Public Works, we have been wanting to replace that facility for a very long time. I could probably, well, I know for a fact our building official could today condemn one of those buildings. And they're scrunched, they don't have enough room. So we've wanted to rebuild, but do we rebuild there or do we look at another site? What's the smart thing to do? So Dr. Evans came out and did a analysis of the elevation of not only Public Works, but also our fire station. Our fire station is a concern because we've wanted to add another floor to that building. Unfortunately, during Matthew, it got to a point where they couldn't move out of the fire station because it was flooded. South Patrick Drive was so inundated that they staged at another area of the city during that storm. So there's a concern there. They're right in an area that is very much at risk. So do we want to invest 50 to 75 years worth of city dollars into a facility that we're going to have to move in 20? And so that's the, you know, that's the unfortunate conundrum that elected officials are in, because many of our residents can't see the impacts of climate change yet, especially here in Satellite Beach. So when you're trying to plan 30 years out, you know, it's hard for them to wrap their minds around that, and that you're going to forego this perfectly good fire station and move it somewhere else. And so it's a political issue that they've had to deal with during this time. They did agree to move both the fire station and the Public Works building after Dr. Well, we call him Jason, Dr. Jason came up and presented, and he made the case. He did the analysis, and I was real proud of them that they decided on science rather than, you know, and decided to take the political heat of doing that. So we purchased property closer to A1A, and we're moving both of those buildings right now. Out of that project, we also realized that we needed to update our stormwater master plan. So we contacted our engineer, our contracted engineer, and he actually had to change his model to include sea level rise projection in his model. And that's the first time he's ever had to do that, which was an interesting exercise for him. And after he came up with the plan that we needed, the city council did vote to double the stormwater fee to $204 per equivalent residential unit. And what that means is basically $204 per single family home, but it's adjusted for apartment buildings and condominiums and so on, and commercial lots. So we are moving forward with many pipe replacements. We've already done, you saw the ones that were completed on DeSoto, and you saw the size of those pipes. They were twice the size as the previous ones, and we're getting ready to start major work on Park Avenue this year. We also created a climate ambassador team, and this was a group of people just to talk about the private side. And this was done outside of the Stetson project, because our Stetson project really focused on our infrastructure and our city owned properties. And this had a lot to do with the coast and the erosion that was occurring. And we also talked about a lot of the issues that we're having with flooding, because when you have properties in the city that are as old as ours, because we were built out primarily in the 50s and 60s, well before stormwater laws. So most of our city has never been built with stormwater systems, and we've had to retrofit big systems in there to take care of stormwater. So what we really wanted people to do is redevelop and build their own stormwater, so the taxpayers didn't have to foot that bill. But that takes code changes, and it takes you know, some very and sometimes heated discussions, because it does change the character of our community, and it is a difficult thing to go through. But we did get to the point where we increased the construction setbacks for beachfront properties by 15 feet from the ocean. And this was offset by a decrease in the same amount in the front setbacks. Unfortunately, for a lot of those property owners, the coastal construction control line already existed right in the middle of a lot of those properties. So when you increase the setback by 15 feet, it doesn't matter how much you increase the front, it still affects them. And so it did affect a lot of property owners from being able to redevelop. And we did complete this in 2018, and actually we're undergoing a DOA challenge, but that has been dropped. So we no longer have a challenge to that particular strategy. We are looking at a charter amendment for the ballot to direct densities away from areas of known flooding. This is very controversial. And then move those densities to areas that are appropriate. And that is in areas closer to the beach. We don't want to encourage development on the dunes and the beach, but on the west side of A1A. And so we are working on those amendments. And that provides incentives for redevelopment and development in non-flood zone areas. And what that also does is increase the, it gives an incentive for property owners to not just renovate, but to redevelop and pull their buildings up and put stormwater under their buildings, because right now our lots are just a little too small for that. So those are just some of the other strategies beyond what you're going to hear tonight that the city has been working on and has accomplished. This is an example of that issue that I was talking about. This is a current commercial development. This is a new one. It was built under the current stormwater regulations. This is ABC Liquor. And you can see that they have stormwater on the north, on the north and south in those little triangles. And they meet all of the landscape requirements, all the parking requirements. And you can see that their building is approximately 15% of the site. This is an older development. This is one, I think it's right across from, it's right near DeKines. Like, it's on Cinnamon, I think. Yeah, Cinnamon and A1A. And this is a property that was just renovated. There's no compliance with setbacks. You can see it was built right up to the side of the property, right up to the property line. No compliance with landscaping. There's not a tree on the property, and there's no stormwater. And you can see that the building takes up 37% of the site. So with new stormwater laws, it takes up a lot of the property. It takes about 20% of your property. So unless you give property owners some out to that, they're not going to redevelop because they don't want to lose their building space. So the idea is to give them more height and density so they have an incentive to tear down and rebuild and comply with modern stormwater and environmental laws. So here's the meat of the meeting. This is, I know you all as a sustainability board aren't used to dealing with comprehensive plans. That's really the job of the Planning Advisory Board. But a comprehensive plan is required by law, by state law. We are required, all of local governments are required to adopt a comprehensive plan. And I'm proud to say that the city of Satellite Beach was one of the first cities in the state of Florida to adopt one back in the 80s. And all of the comprehensive plan includes what we call elements, because as planners, and that's my background, we can't just call them chapters. We have to have some cool name for them. But what these elements do is they have goals, objectives, and policies that guide growth, environmental protection, infrastructure, public school coordination. And there's required elements. The required elements are a future land use element. And so that's basically how we're going to guide future land use in the city. Private development, you adopt land use categories. Those land use categories have to be consistent with the zoning districts that we have in the city. Then we have environmental protection. element. We have a coastal management element, infrastructure element, capital improvement element, public school coordination element, and so on. And some cities have more elective elements like a sustainability element and so on. But our amendments here are really primarily related to the required elements that we are required by law to have. The comprehensive plan, when we make a change to the comprehensive plan, it's called an amendment. And when you do a change to the text, the policies, goals, objectives, and policies, it's called a text amendment. Those text amendments are sent up to the state of Florida for review. And so there's a group of planners, I used to be one a long time ago, in Tallahassee, and they work for the Department of Economic Opportunity. It used to be the Department of Community Affairs. And they review to make sure that your or our comprehensive plan amendment meets state law. And so if you look at chapter 163, you will see all the requirements that we are required to have in the comprehensive plan. So the Florida Sea Grant project policy recommendations were basically they're based directly on the project that we did with the data analysis, the the elevation, and all of the vulnerabilities that came out of the latest data analysis that we did. The policy recommendations primarily address infrastructure and the city's ability to provide infrastructure and facilities in the future with the challenges of climate change and sea level rise. So the city is about 10 to 30 years ahead of having to make major infrastructure decisions and changes to address climate change. But I do want you all to be aware that we are already starting to address increased flooding in areas of the city that had never flooded before. And so a lot of it's interesting, we have our stormwater master plan, but every year we make changes to it because there's another area of the city that pops up, and it's, an area that's concern to us, and we end up having to adjust it so we can address those areas. So even though you'll see that policy recommendations are primarily to position the city so that when we have to make these decisions, the processes and procedures and the expectations are set in the comprehensive plan so that we are basically setting the expectations of the community now, so that 10, 15 years ago, we have a long-standing policy that the community can actually count on. And that's important when you're talking about things like raising roads and prioritizing projects. There may be a project that affects, 100 households, 100 housing units, a neighborhood, a very large area. And that project makes financial sense because the cost benefit is there. But you may have an area that has 3 or 4 houses that's inundated, flooding, and the cost to address that goes well beyond the city's financial capability of doing so. And those are some of the hard policy decisions that we have to make as a community. Where do we prioritize our tax dollars? Where do we prioritize our projects in the future? And, making sure that the community, when they're buying property, when they're investing in their property, understand our policies and positions now so that they can count on those 10 to 30 years from now. And I'm going to stop here before I get into the actual policies and see if Thomas wants to comment on any of what I've just said and see if he wants to expand on any of that. Thomas, do you have anything to say?
Well, Courtney, you did an amazing job of summing that up, I think. And I really did want to say, again, thanks and congratulations on your leadership and the courage in leading. And as you observed, it wasn't always, and probably in the future at times also still won't always be popular with everyone, but it is good leadership because it is looking more to the future. So congratulations on that. Yes, I think the city does have a lot of more time than many places have to start making some of these major decisions and be prepared for the future. I would note that one thing that's interesting that the most recent Stetson and UFC grant work found is that because the Indian River Lagoon side of the city doesn't have such the clear tidal signal that the ocean side does, that you're not going to get as much warning through high tide events of how much worse the flooding's getting. And once the flooding starts, it just is going to continue to get worse. And that's important because that kind of tidal flooding is the warning that Southeast Florida got that motivated it to start finding it. You're going to get less of that warning. So that makes it even doubly important that you're taking these steps now. And you also raise, I think, the other crucial point, which is that the more you do now ahead of time, the more you can be prepared when things are bad, both financially and administratively, organizationally, as you indicated. And also just helping property owners as property ownership continues to turn over slowly, that property owners understand that there is a challenging future ahead here for Satellite Beach, and the ability of Satellite Beach to guarantee at the same level that you have in the past all of the infrastructure and level of service that you've provided. And I guess as one last comment, I think that trying to engage your community, that's another key point here, because there are going to be a lot of challenges, and there are going to be times ahead where the decisions aren't going to make everybody happy. And it's going to be and even when people think they want something, when they're presented with a bill, they still may not be happy. So I think getting the community really engaged and keeping them engaged about how and why you're making the decisions you are will be critical. Thank you. And I'm open to questions at any point during the presentation if you'd like.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions on what we've presented so far before we get into the policies?
It's kind of a technical question, Courtney, but I think when I've heard you talk about this before, you were talking about high levels. Just for clarity, I mean, there's the category 3, we get hit, what does that look? And then there's HAZIS model, that's an earlier time frame. But all the technical language about high, is that like high tide, high yearly water level, which is like in the fall? Just to clarify.
When we talk about the curves,
yeah.
Asking, so that's actually what the Army Corps does is they've established a curve based on historical data,
right?
And it's primarily gained from Key West. So basically monitoring the level of sea level rise for years to create this curve, and they base it on if it's a low, and they have a low curve, a medium, and a high.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically worst case scenario to best. And, our planning board decided to use the worst, and couldn't have made a better decision because every time we do a new analysis, we're tracking to the worst. So, and that's shown across the state and across the nation and the world.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else got anything? No raised hands? Okay. So I'm going to go through just the infrastructure element tonight because it is a lot of stuff. And so we're not making any decisions tonight. I want to make sure that you all really, so it's hard to read, especially the documents that we sent you, without having a good presentation and having people explain it. So now that you have heard that, I encourage you to go back and read that. If you have any I think, John, did you have a question? I think John just raised his hand. John, did you
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I believe the question was different from what you were answering. It's something we wrestled with very greatly in 2010. I mean, in 2010. Every day you have 2 high tides. And so if you average those over a year, that's mean high tide. But like we see here, in the fall, the sea level rises, about a foot. And so during the fall, you'll have maybe a month when the high tide is about a foot higher than it is during normal tides. And then you have king tides, which happen a couple times a year. And so there's mean high tide, mean high tide, and there's other levels too that they talk about. And so we had to figure which one to use, because the point is, yes, your house doesn't flood every day, but if it floods for 2 weeks in the fall, I don't think you'll be happy. And if it floods once a year, you probably won't be happy. So there's a bunch of different very technical stuff there that I'm not real conversant in, but that's let's say the devil's in the details.
Thanks, John. Yeah, and Courtney was also, I think between the two of you, that was sort of answering my big question is right, all those technical details. And what you highlighted, I think Courtney had highlighted previously in other conversations that we've had on this about understanding what that means. It's not like the water moves in and it's your new front yard, but it's a regular occurrence, and just explaining that to folks and how that looks in the worst case scenario. Thanks, John.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm trying to get my.
Just plug in.
Would you all mind giving me like 5 seconds, because my computer's getting ready to die and I need to figure out how to plug it in real quick.
Sure. We could maybe just read a little bit. You got a lot of text here.
And this is Thomas. I'll buy us a few moments if people have had a chance to read while Courtney's getting her computer plugged in. This is actually the goal, which is the most overarching part of the comprehensive plan, is organized into goals, objectives, and policies. So the goals are the highest level. And we thought it was important here to integrate this key consideration, which is considering the fiscal and physical challenges of sea level rise and climate change, because so much of the infrastructure element, as well as the capital improvements element, has historically basically committed the local government to dealing with the worst problems first in infrastructure and flooding, and for basically guaranteeing infrastructure. And the underlying premise of most of these changes is that at some point in the future, that will no longer be realistic from a financial perspective for the city of Satellite Beach. It's a relatively modest sized city. You've got relatively modest property values and density. And so it just limits dramatically the ability of the city to generate revenue to do very large protective infrastructure projects, such as those you might see being either executed or proposed in places like Miami Beach or Boston or New York. It's not going to be realistic. And in the short to medium term, there will be some federal funding. We can actually talk at some point, if you'd like, about a new federal funding program that's coming online this fall, to which the city might want to apply for some infrastructure needs. But currently, we're looking at the fact that I think it's the 4th year in a row that the United States has suffered from over 10 different natural are different disasters that cost over $1 billion each. And the federal deficit last year was $1 trillion, and this year is on track to be $4 trillion. So I think the writing is on the wall that to a large degree, I think that local governments, especially again, small and medium sized, would be well advised to not assume that someone is going to bail them out.
So, and that's exactly, that was discussed quite a bit when we started creating these policies, because we have to understand that our economy is very, very different than the economies of Miami Beach and Miami and so on. So while they have the density and the commercial and industrial development that brings in revenue that supports raising roads and huge projects, the cost of doing things like that is just, it's exorbitant. And you'll see areas like Key West, who, out of all of Florida, is probably, along with Miami, the hardest hit with sea level rise at this moment. They're very similar to us in the fact that they don't have the tax base necessary to justify raising roads, and they don't have the economy that justifies that, like Miami Beach. So those are some of the challenges that we have, is making sure that we balance the expectations of the residents and business owners that may be expecting something like that in the future because they see it happening in other areas, but we don't have the funding sources to accomplish those projects. And, how are we going to prioritize those? How are we going to manage, the expectations of the community? And so this, when you're looking at the comprehensive plan, and I hope that you all, after this meeting and between this one and the next one, go on our website and look at the whole comprehensive plan. It's posted there, and you can read the whole thing. It's exciting reading. You might want to, if you're having trouble sleeping, it might be something good that helps you get to that point. But you'll see how it's set up, and it's set up with an overreaching goal, and then it has an objectives and policies to achieve those objectives. And this is the changes that we want to make to the goal, and that's basically prioritizing. That we will prioritize or provide, and when we're talking about public facilities and services, we will be considering the fiscal and physical challenges. I got to move my little thing, of sea level rise and climate change, and the city's policies on sea level rise and climate change to meet existing and future needs. So and you'll see that in the later policies. So when we're looking at, are we going to build new sidewalks and bike trails in an area that is going to be inundated and is already being inundated? Or are we going to prioritize that in an area that's not? And so those are the decisions that we're talking about.
If I could just quickly add in, Courtney, thanks for mentioning Monroe County. I was just virtually watched part of a recent commission meeting down there, and they were discussing the neighborhood that had gone underwater for 3 months at the end of last year. I think many of us heard about that. But yeah, this neighborhood's roads were underwater for 94 to 91 days, something like that. Yeah. And now the city had actually done an initial pilot project in another neighborhood. So this neighborhood is now screaming at the city that now they deserve to have everything done at no cost to them. And the estimated cost of elevating the roads for that neighborhood is about $20 million. It's 138 homes. And they're looking at $20 million to buy them maybe 20 to 30 years.
Yeah. And you could buy all of those homes twice with that, and that's the challenge that we have. And so, Chair, I know that I think I saw that Member Fergus had his hand raised. I don't know if you want to take.
Yeah. Yeah. Can folks hear me? Can folks hear me?
Yeah.
We can
Yes.
hear you.
Okay. Yeah. On the point I wanted to make, following on what Thomas said, the government of Monroe County has already gone on public record as saying they will not be able to afford to take care of everybody, and that includes buying out homes. And so, you know, they're facing a really going to be rough, because you can't believe that folks won't go to court when they're being flooded for weeks out of a year. And they just don't have the money. And so that's the reason that you need to get not just a couple years, decades ahead of this. So that when the times come, you say, hey, these people knew what they were doing when they bought the property. That's just the point. It's already occurring for some people in South Florida.
That is literally the gist of everything we're presenting. I mean, he summed it up probably the best I've heard. It's basically setting up those expectations and making sure people are aware, because, and quite frankly, a lot of it is risk mitigation for the city itself, and making sure that, you know, we protect ourselves in the future from what we're seeing already in other areas that didn't plan, you know, as well as we are doing right now. So, and, you know, to be honest, the issues of climate change, we're just very fortunate that it happening in other areas right now has spurred us into planning for something that's not happening yet. And so we have the blessing of time right now to make sure that we get everything in order to be able to deal with it when it comes. So, and you know, I forget to mention that Member Fergus and Dr. Ken Lindeman, who was on our comprehensive planning board at the time, were really the driving forces of the city looking into climate change to begin with. So Member Fergus has sat on all of our technical advisory committees, has been with us through all of this from day one, and probably talks to Thomas Rupert once a week, I'm guessing. So he's very, very well versed in this, and so I'm going to be asking him to comment a lot in the next few slides as we move through. So does anybody have any comments on this particular slide?
I have just one thought that's come up that might be like a parking lot thought, but having to do with our green achievement targets, particularly things like complete streets. And, you know, as we're thinking about this long-term planning, and you're talking about encouraging residents to be moving and facilities toward the west side of A1A, and we recently in the last year have gone through things like speed limits going down, crosswalks, and we're having this pretty vigorous debate right now about A1A, which I think is good. But I think it does sort of, it's a great opportunity / challenge maybe to have these discussions about envisioning what that new town, that new city looks like with these other green achievement targets. And I think it really does start to shift our idea of A1A, which so far has been a pretty fast, pretty big throughway, but not necessarily other sort of complete street kind of elements. And so what does that look like? I just think it's just kind of putting that on the parking lot. It's such an opportunity for these other green achievement targets that we've been talking about in the long term, and finding those opportunities to align that.
And I think that is a great point. And it is exactly what we were hoping that you all would start doing, is to start incorporating, you know, everything is connected and everything's interrelated. And, you know, we really want to move resiliency and sustainability into everything that we do, including new development, including road projects, including, so it, and all of these things last, every time we approve a road project, a new development, you're doing something for 100 years. And so making sure that we incorporate all of these ideas so that we do it right the first time. And so that's exactly the type of thought that we are hoping that the board would start thinking of and helping us with, and kind of infusing, you know, the idea of sustainability into resiliency, making them one, you know, and moving that into growth management decisions that include transportation. So, okay, so are we ready to move on to the next? Okay. It's not moving. Okay, there we go. So the next objective is basically saying that we're going to be balancing design considerations for climate change and sea level rise, and doing cost benefit analysis to determine the challenges of even completing that type of infrastructure project. And this, again, goes into, you know, when we do new infrastructure projects, we're basically requiring the city to incorporate climate change into those decisions, to incorporate sea level rise into those decisions, and to do a cost benefit analysis to make sure that once we get the cost of that project, to make sure that there's a benefit that exceeds the cost of doing the project. So I'm hoping I'm saying that right. But basically, like we said before, some of these projects that address climate change and resiliency exceed the benefit to the community and the population that you're serving. And what we're wanting to do is make sure that we are not constructing a new infrastructure project without incorporating climate change and sea level rise projections into that project to make sure it's dealing with it. But at the same time, we don't want to complete a project that exceeds the benefit to the community. So I'm hoping I'm explaining that correctly. Thomas, do you have any other better way to say that?
Well, I guess, and you've said it, it's a hard thing to sometimes express, because I guess there are two different options. If right now the kind of state of the art typically is to encourage any government unit looking at building long-lived infrastructure to say, oh my gosh, you have to build that new infrastructure to withstand, you know, sea level rise. And at one level that makes sense. Of course, you know, if sea level rise, if sea level is going to be 3 or 4 or 5, 6 feet higher by 2100, and your infrastructure lasts till then, you want it to last through that, right? Well, maybe, actually, because maybe your community will have changed so dramatically by that level of sea level rise that maybe that infrastructure won't even be necessary at that point. Is it in a place that's going to still be utilized and served? So there are questions that I think it's more nuanced than just saying you want to build everything so that it lasts, you know, the usual lifespan of that type of infrastructure through sea level rise.
Oh, great. Member Fergus, did you want to comment on that at all? Yes. So.
Yeah, what I had prepared several years ago, I kind of did what Thomas is talking about. I looked ahead and said, where do we think we'll be, not just 10 years from now, but 30, 40, 50 years. And when you do that, you can then back up and get a feeling for how you want to get there. And that's a document, it's about 8 pages long, as I recall. And I think what I'll do, I'll send it to Julie, and then she can send it out to the people. And I'm not saying this is the answer. What I would suggest is it's at least a point to start a strong dialogue on where we really think we want to be and how we're going to get there. if you don't have a roadmap, if you get where you're going, it's only by chance.
Oh, okay, so what John is going to send you is something that he's worked on with Dr. Lindemann and Thomas Rupert and Aaron Deedy, who's another member of our team. And it really was the, start of this. So I encourage you all to look at that seriously, because it is going to be kind of the start of the conversation of the implementation of this. So the next one, I'm trying to get to the, okay. The next one is a policy. And this is the policy that talks about the coastal construction. And no public infrastructure or public buildings will be constructed seaward of the 1981 Coastal Construction Control Line, with the exception of minor structures. Such structures are customarily provided to support recreation and open space activities, as well as pedestrian activities, in accordance with dune protection design standards. Infrastructure and roadway improvements within already developed public right-of-ways will be maintained, and then this is what we're changing, as determined feasible and reasonable by city policy in good faith attempts to meet level of service standards. And the point of this is we have level of service standards throughout the city, but we may get to a point where we're inundated in a certain area that we may not be able to make those level of service standards anymore in a reasonable manner, and that the cost to do that outweighs the benefit to the population that we're serving. So again, that's a more controlled or a more detailed level, and this is really with the coastal construction, basically the coastal areas. And to give you a good example of this, if we have coastal erosion that is affecting, for example, and I'm not saying it is, but for example, the Park Avenue beach access, and it gets to the point that we're replacing that beach access every year. And we say, you know what, the erosion at that point has gotten to the point where we can no longer keep up that area. And the beach access is now, the erosion is now affecting the roadway base. Those are the decisions that we have to say, you know what, maybe we abandon that area and maybe we don't fix it as often, or maybe we don't fix it at all anymore. And I'm not saying that we're going to do that. I'm just saying that's a good example of what might happen, particularly in an erosion standpoint. Thomas, do you have anything to add on this?
No, not on that one, I don't. I think you've covered
Okay.
it, Courtney.
Member Fergus, do you have anything to add? Okay.
No, I don't. I'm having trouble with this technology, so
Okay.
I'm a little slow in responding.
Okay. All right. Well, we can wait for you. No worries. So I'm going to go to the next one. And this is another objective. Okay. And so this is: the city shall manage its storm drainage system in a way that seeks to provide balance in serving interests of the public health, safety, and preventing property damage, protecting natural drainage features and functions of natural groundwater recharge, and acknowledging the challenges of sea level rise and climate change. So again, this is basically saying there may be areas of the city that we can't do this anymore, that we cannot meet the residents' expectations because the cost of doing so outweighs the benefit of those people that we're serving. So if you have an area that has, 3 or 4 homes and the drainage system is failing and the cost to improve that drainage system outweighs the benefit to those homeowners, then we have to acknowledge that. And you know, and again, like the city, we have, our city has a history of doing and going above and beyond for many of our residents, and we will always continue to do that. But the challenge of climate change and sea level rise, it may get to a point where we can't do that anymore without being detrimental to the rest of the city in terms of prioritizing a few for the many. So that's the point, again, of this policy. Anybody else have any input on that?
Yeah, I would just add to that, Courtney, you're absolutely right. It's not, I would add that in addition to considering the few versus the many in the benefit, I would also say that this relates to the idea that how long the benefit will last is also critical. Right. For example, you'll see when we get to drainage that I specifically recommended taking out the address worst areas first. Why? Right. Because with sea level rise going at the rate it is and the increase in that rate, if you start by spending all of your money on the lowest lying areas, you're probably going to incur pretty massive bonded debt that you'll need, decades to retire. But then you're now overextended and can't undertake new drainage projects that might serve areas that are defensible for a longer period of time. Why? Right. Because you burned up your funding capacity in an area that was just a losing battle to begin with.
Right. So we want to make sure that we recognize that, and we have time to encourage good development in good areas, and we have time to discourage bad development in bad areas. And we right now we're addressing city infrastructure policies, which does affect private development. But as you'll see in your future meetings, we are going to be bringing to you, choices of how we can address incentivizing development in good areas and, de-incentivizing bad areas. So those are some of the discussions we're going to have in the future. Any other members have any questions on this policy? Okay. And so this is a new policy, and it states the city shall accept no dedications of any infrastructure for public use and maintenance, including but not limited to roadways, sidewalks, medians, drainage facilities, recreation facilities, or any other type of infrastructure, unless such infrastructure is proven by the dedicating party to meet all current city ordinances and standards that would govern such infrastructure were it to be constructed on the date of its dedication. Bona fide emergency exemptions may apply to such dedications as determined by the city. This policy is not intended to prevent the city from accepting dedications of conservation easements or other green space or natural areas that either have no human-made infrastructure or where an agreement is included by the dedicating entity that it will hold the city harmless from any responsibility to maintain any human-made infrastructure on the property. And the purpose of this policy is to address the very real issue of areas of the city that are governed by homeowners associations and private entities that, or even other public entities that want to hand over their infrastructure responsibilities to the city and knowing that they can't do it anymore. And this happens a lot. So we need to protect the city and the taxpayers of our community and not making those decisions, and policies like this assist future council members in avoiding political bad decisions in the future. And that's probably the best way to describe that. So sometimes, in a small city like ours, it's difficult to say no. And this is a policy that gives us, in the future council members, a way to say no. Does anybody else have any questions on this?
So just in layman's terms, there are some self-managed areas of the city, neighborhoods, like you said, HOA. They take on the responsibility, but like in a crisis kind of moment, oh gosh, this really is happening, and yikes,
Yeah.
they can't give it back.
Right.
So it's just a matter of being crystal clear about that and as far advanced as possible.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Thomas?
Well, I would just clarify on that. It's not about these places giving back to the community. They owned it from the start. The community
Right.
didn't develop that infrastructure.
Yeah.
It's private now, and their desire to make it public could, as Courtney indicate, hinge on the fact that their maintenance costs are increasing. And that's
Right.
exactly what the city doesn't want to take on when it was a private liability to begin with.
Yeah. And just so, we did experience, we've had experienced some of that prior to me working for the city, that we maintain things that we probably shouldn't, and to be honest. And when I worked for other communities, that was very common, that, stormwater systems, things that are difficult for HOAs to maintain, will eventually start approaching the city to take those over. And the city, and many times wanting to do what's right for the environment and not wanting to get into litigation, will just do it. And the problem with doing that, and especially when you're dealing with climate change, is just doing it becomes cost exorbitant for the other taxpayers of the community. And we really need to be spending our money on retrofitting and, increasing the stormwater systems that we have now, and not taking over, a problem for a group that has always had that problem. So that's the reason why this policy is there. Okay. The next one is the city shall implement the comprehensive stormwater management plan. The city's priorities shall be established on a drainage basin basis. The stormwater management plan shall also prioritize stormwater management, design, and construction based upon the city's policies on sea level rise and climate change. So basically that enforces the requirement of the city to include climate change and sea level rise projections into our stormwater master planning documents. That's important because I might not always be here and this council may change. So we need to, solidify that so it's a long-term policy that the city has to abide by. And to change this, that would have to be notified to the residents. It goes through 2 public hearings. It has to go to DC, to the DEO for approval. So once you put it in the comp plan, it's really difficult to take it out. So those are some of the future planning that we try to do, knowing that we might not always be here, and trying to take care of the future.
Can folks hear me?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this thing, suddenly all my controls changed. A point I wanted to make on the business about not accepting for dedication things. You might ask Thomas to talk about what happened to St. Johns County. He could give you a short horror story on what happens if you're not careful.
Well, thank you, John. It's tough to do it short, but I'll try to give you a thumbnail sketch. Back in the 50s or 60s, the state DOT built part of State Highway A1A on a little spit of sand in between the Atlantic Ocean and a river. And within 10 years, it was seeing so much erosion action there that DOT said, bad idea. So they decided they weren't going to fight that long-term battle. So they purchased new right-of-way and relocated 1.6 miles of A1A. And then they still had that old piece of right-of-way and the pavement road there. And they didn't want to keep maintaining and dealing with that. So they finally, in 1979, turned it over to St. Johns County. And St. Johns County accepted that right-of-way. To date, the legal bill, just the legal bill for defending a lawsuit by property owners against the county, because of course the erosion didn't stop, and so the county's on the hook to fix it. And the lawsuit alone has cost the county $1 million for a handful of homes, and it has cost far more than that for the county to try to maintain this 1.6 miles of road. At one point, the county had spent, in one 5-year period, they spent 25 times as much money per mile per year average on that segment of road as a standard county road. So it has had massive, massive economic impact on their road department that some good old boys on the commission accepted this right of way back in 1979.
Thanks, Thomas, and John also for your longstanding work on this. Do any other members have any other questions about any of the slides we saw with Courtney, or thoughts as how it relates to our work as well?
This is Jim Carlson.
Hi.
I had a question about the last policy that was there, and it had to do with the last sentence strike through. And in reading it, is it necessary to strike through that? Because, I mean, is the underlined, it doesn't seem to me to be mutually exclusive that you could actually do both things.
Well, you mind if I take a shot at that, Courtney?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, James. I was actually going to draw everybody's attention to that and say, after Courtney described this, that for me, when we were thinking about putting the recommendations together, to me, it's just as important what's struck out there as what is added.
Agreed.
Because again, this goes back to that idea I was kind of trying to get at earlier. If you put major infrastructure funding now into the worst areas, where are you going to get that money? Typically, local governments get that money through bond issues. And a bond issue gives you, your millions up front, or, hundreds of thousands, whatever it is. But you have to pay it back over time, 10, 15, 20-year time period to pay it back. And if you start addressing the worst areas right now, some of those, in the case of Satellite Beach, they're probably going to be west of St. Patrick. And there, whether or not you want to be bonding, in 10 years down the road, do you really want to try to put a 20 or 30-year bond issuance out for infrastructure in that area? I'm not sure whether some of those areas will be salvageable or not, depending upon, again, the rate of sea level rise. But at some point, you're definitely looking at expenditures to address the worst problems first could compromise your ability to be more resilient and more forward thinking in how you're prolonging the quality of life and longevity of other parts of your community.
Yeah. So to give you an example, if you had an area that was inundated today and you knew that that was never going to end, and that like the St. John's example, like you are never going to, there's no way to engineer your way out of that. And we know that, but when you're a resident who owns a property there, they don't want to know that. And if you have a policy like this, we are required to address that. It would be better for the remaining residents of the city to say, you know what, we're never going to get to that. It's a unsolvable problem. We need to address areas that can be engineered out of it and have a chance. And that's where we need to spend our money. So that's why we wanted to strike out that last piece.
Thank you.
Any other board member comments or questions?
So I just wanted to end by, thanking you all for taking your time like this. I know it was a long presentation, and the next one's going to be unfortunately just as long, but this is a very important topic. And it's interesting, when we created the sustainability board, we always kept climate change, resiliency work kind of separate. And I get invited a lot to do presentations across the state of Florida, but even in other states, about our work. And I always end with the sustainability board and your work. And that's because you can't really say that we're only going to address the impacts. We have to talk about also addressing the source. And that is where you come in. So I think we want you all to begin helping us in combining these efforts and making it, resiliency and sustainability. And so part of understanding what we have to do from a resiliency standpoint, I'm hoping drives some of the sustainability efforts that we create and drives, new and even the work on existing green achievement targets, because it is all interrelated. And like what you said, Chair Schroeder, is it's important that we have an idea of the end goal when we make any decision. And if we're talking about complete streets help reduce emissions, and emissions are a big contributor to climate change. So, when Nick was talking about future presenters, I had one of the presenters from the last Citizens Advisory or Citizens Oversight Committee on the lagoon tax come in and speak to council. And the biggest reason for that is we keep getting questions about why the lagoon is so clear. Why does it look so good? And one of the major components of that is because people aren't doing anything. People aren't driving their cars. And a lot of people don't realize, and I do strongly believe they don't want to come to terms with the fact that emissions really affect our lagoon. And that is a huge source of pollution to the lagoon. And if we can control that and get them under control through public transportation projects, those are big accomplishments that, should be the goal of sustainability. Growth management should be part of that. And, when we talk about, increasing density, it's not because we want to make ourselves South Florida. It's because we want to get people out of flood zones and still keep our economy so people don't have to drive over the bridge to get services and create more emissions. And, we want people to feel comfortable using the bus service. And to do that, you have to scrunch people in and make it walkable and bikeable and, transit available. So I'm a planner, so I think up here, but that's, a very big part of climate change and reacting to it is not just dealing with the fallout, it's stopping it. And that's where you all come in. So that's really our goal in getting our sustainability board involved in most of this.
That's great. I love that. And I think also just to add to that in terms of from like the board member role perspective, especially for as our new members are coming in and getting oriented, we've talked a lot about in the last 6 to 12 months about the role of the board and clarifying and having that shared understanding. And I think some of the things that have been brought up a lot are the capacity for community outreach, the extent of our communication with the community through events, but also our shared networks. And then always kind of, I think, trying to push ourselves, as you're saying, how do all of these achievement targets and how do these things relate? Which means basically that functionally in every meeting, but also every event, maybe we always ask the question, what other goal does this relate to? And are we, as explicitly as we can, integrating multiple messages? So if we're doing native plants and reduction of fertilizer, are we integrating that message of climate change into a workshop or that kind of communication and outreach? So just from the board member role, I think my last question to you, Courtney, was, for the next time, did you say we're going to have a longer presentation, which I think we're all fine with. Most of us usually like to jump in and learn. But what questions should we be thinking about for that discussion between now and the next meeting in July?
Well, I think it would be great. We're going to send you John Fergus's paper, which I encourage all of you to read. And you don't have to read the comp plan, but just go look at it and see the structure of it and see the, what it deals with. So you understand how this all fits. And then, you know, if you really want to know, you can look at Chapter 163 and see what, you know, is required by us. But, you know, at least get familiar with the comp plan and you know, how that, you know, how these policy changes are integrating into it. I think it would be good for you if you have any questions. You know, we are part of the East Central Florida Regional Planning Climate Compact. Julie is my proxy for that, and I never get to go to the meetings, so she's basically the member in that, and we're mentoring her in understanding climate change and being able to answer questions and stuff like that. So if you have any questions, send her that. Nick and Lexi are both also very familiar with all of the work that we've done. And I'm going to give you, like, all of the members that are on the call and, you know, in the community, I'm going to give you my cell phone number right now, 321-626-9028. Please give me a call if you have you want to discuss anything, if you want to go to lunch, you want to come in and meet with me at any time. This is a very important endeavor for the community, and I will always make time for your questions and your concerns. So, you know, please try to look at all that. I know it is a lot of information. You know, you will get more comfortable with it as time moves on, so don't let it overwhelm you. And then we'll, at the next meeting, I'll work with Julie to give you a presentation on the climate compact so you can see what we're doing regionally and what other communities are doing outside of Satellite Beach. And while Satellite Beach is a leader, we're definitely not the only cities and communities that are addressing this issue. So it might be good for you to get a presentation. Maybe I can get the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council planning director to come in and give you a presentation of just some idea of what other cities are doing to address this. And I think, you know, all of the rest of the communities that are dealing with this are starting to realize the importance of sustainability initiatives in addressing climate change. And you know, I'm hoping that we're going to be a leader in that as well. Because as I'm starting to talk with the network, that, you know, people are starting to realize that too. So hopefully, you know, growth management and sustainability will become a regular partner with resiliency planning, and you know, it definitely needs to be part of the normal conversation. So with that, you know, again, if you guys have any questions, you know, please make time to call me, and I will be glad to spend any moment in meeting, lunch, anything to explain anything that you can address, any concerns.
Great, thank you. Any other thoughts, questions from board members? Okay, well, I believe, have the majority of our agenda.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm technically illiterate here.
You're doing great, John.
Yeah, one other thing in line with Courtney's talking about working the front end of the problem. I just thought I'd mention that the city is in the 4th week of a 10-week project with the NASA Discover program, looking at the potential for rooftop solar in the city to contribute to the council's adopted goal of 100% clean energy by 2050. You know, we're just at the beginnings of that project, but work is underway already trying to meet that goal.
Reducing emissions is a big deal, and we need to talk more. We need to also include transportation emissions in that conversation, and that you can, I've just normally experienced that many people don't want to talk about that because it involves public transportation, and most people love their privacy in their cars, and that's understandable. But at some point we need to have alternatives, and there's many communities that successfully implement, you know, good public transportation systems. And if we don't have, you know, that option, we are never going to really reduce emissions here, especially here in Florida. So.
Yeah, I would agree. we became passionate about the bike collective because we thought there's quite a few physically able folks on a flat surface with really good weather all year that could get within 2 or 3 miles with even, maybe we have an e-bike kind of promotion at one point.
Yep.
Something. Okay, so any other comments? No, you always have to wait a few extra seconds with mute. John, you're not alone. Mute is always a slight delay for everyone. Okay, so I was thinking we have most of our agenda for July. We're going to come back to this topic. So we'll focus on that. Just as a parking lot, you know, way back in a different lifetime before the pandemic, we had talked about just reviewing Dylan's recycling video and having some comments on that. So maybe we just put that on for just a reminder for folks to look through that and forward any feedback.
I think we can talk to him about getting that on the agenda. We also have Nick's landscaping response. So what we could do is to have those 2 agenda items, and we'll just go through the next element of the policies. And I don't know, Nick, do you have any comments on handling that?
For the landscaping response or the video?
Do you think we could get both of those on the next agenda? Because we don't want to lose track of what we're already doing.
I think that we can get the landscaping response on there. I'll continue to work on that and make sure that there's enough background information that people understand what we're talking about. I think we can probably get it under 20 minutes.
Okay. Okay, so I'll try to limit, you know, we'll just, you know, go through element by element. So there's no rush, you know, we want to get it done by the end of the year, but,
Okay.
you know, so.
Yeah. Well, and just for structuring our work in terms, I know we're very sort of a group of doers, a working board, that kind of thing, but also thinking long-term. Just I'm keeping in my mind as we have our conversations with each element, sort of if we can highlight, lift up for all of us, very short-term actionable items on that in terms of, I don't know, integrating it to other, you know, events down the line.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but then also what are the long-term things that we need to keep front of mind that can get easily kind of more vague. Yeah, so I'm just making a note also for myself, just to be as a role as a board member, keeping that clear, short and long term. What are we doing with this?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be glad to do that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, so I think we're on to adoption of minutes from February 26th.
I think you had a comment from one of our board members just now.
Oh, thank you.
She asked the question, do you know when we will start talking about future events for the rest of 2020? And Member White.
Yeah, great question, for sure. Well, Nick, you know, seeing as this is really our first meeting back and not in person since the pandemic started, we typically have a robust schedule, but shifting that to, you know, virtual informational events and what are we going to do for the fall? I mean, it's always an open question, but Nick, what are your thoughts for how to move forward?
Well, we are in phase 2, so we are allowed to have volunteer-related events. Currently, there's no word on countywide events that I've been a part of. We're talking about future events with different groups in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about the Ocean Reef Beach Festival yet. There hasn't been any conversation with any project partners on that, community partners. Courtney may know more about that than I do. But as far as our regularly scheduled workshops and things of that nature, we've been trying to roll them in to other existing programs, like the Sustainability Summit with Brevard Sustainability Working Group. Encourage everybody to go onto that. Eastern Central Florida Regional Planning Council is going to be rolling out these equity trainings. Those are something, and I've been sharing a lot of content through Facebook on different things going on in the community, webinars that people can get a hold of and take part in to kind of keep them, like you've said, up to speed and engaged, right? We want to keep engagement. I shared one today from Ideas for Us about water and water shortages and things of that nature. But directly city related hopefully the next thing we'll do is we'll have a planting day on DeSoto as part of that project. I'm probably going to postpone the planting of seagrasses, clams, and oysters. I'm waiting on word from community partners on that one, just because the season has been shifted on us. And to be successful in that project, we're probably going to need to wait till next season because it's too hot now for oyster spawning, clam spawning, and seagrass spawning. So those will probably be postponed until 2020. But we will finish the DeSoto Stormwater Enhancement Project before September. We're on our last stretch. And I'll be sending out email invites for the board, the Sustainability Board, and the Beautification Board for anything like that. It's going to be local to keep our local engagement active. So just stay tuned to your emails, and I'll make sure to get you out some invites.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Nick. I think that's great. Just the fact that we're still moving forward, I think as a board, and it's so we haven't really had the time to meet until now, thinking about what that looks like as we move forward with so much uncertainty month to month. It is tough, but I think one of the things that we've always done really well has been that community outreach. So as you said, with virtual outreach, it would be nice to have some time for us all to be thinking like, what shifted and how does this look different now, maybe in the summer versus in the fall? As we're talking about using like the Gail Meredith in the fall, what is that going to look like? And I think as we get more comfortable with spread out outdoor events versus indoor events and you get more clarity, that might make it easier. But perhaps that's something we can maybe touch on or have more in depth, maybe even in August, in terms of some planning for events for the following year.
If you want, Jennifer, as staff, I can come back with some kind of a outline for engagement opportunities. I know that our volunteers always sign in waivers, and they would just, maybe we can add something to that of how to move forward with social distancing at these events.
Mm-hmm.
Might require a little bit more work from me as far as monitoring and maybe even a prep before we go into some of these events, reminding people to keep their social distance. But with the planting, for example, Lexi had helped me kind of design a way of doing the DeSoto planting where I can actually spray paint out areas and pre-prep an area so that no one has to go outside their designated area to do a planting.
Mm-hmm.
All the plants I will provide ahead of time, lay them out, mark the areas, a little more prep work, but a lot more efficient with the social distancing on the back end.
Right. And I think we're also seeing that people maybe the numbers aren't as great as we might see just based on personal choice, but, to have the option at least. Jenny, you're saying also, are you able to come on speaker? You're saying, I was hoping to talk to you about a couple of ones for the summer, like you have ideas for some events?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I was just hoping to maybe talk about a couple of things that maybe could be done that would be completely safe as far as social distancing, but that maybe we could do within the community that could be beneficial for families or just older kids to do that would be beneficial, as well as for sustainability and impact within the county. And a perfect one would be to do a couple of magnet fishing events, even if one was just at the city center in that canal. People can be completely social distanced. It can be a family event or just, and then we could maybe do a couple of pockets of those throughout the rest of the summer. It's getting people out. It's showing them that they can be out and be okay and social distance and, walk to where they're going and just kind of feel like they can clean that up in their canals and their,
Mm-hmm. That's a great idea. And I remember you talked about that at our last meeting, and the fishing with magnets to pull out any metal out of our water. Yeah, that's perfect.
I know there's a lot of kids fishing in those canals right now at DeSoto and Berkeley and at the city, and we could probably pull out a lot of gear.
Yeah. Well,
okay.
If you want to get with Nick maybe and think about like a date and a process and, like you said, how to make it functionally social distance.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Jenny. That's great. Thank you for bringing it back to us, because I know you said that before, months back. It was always a great idea.
Hey, this is David Bigliotti. I just wanted to touch base with everybody. I haven't talked. I've been holding my breath. This is COVID time, so this is crazy. And, you know, this is the time that we will have to work even harder. If you haven't noticed, go to your local grocery store and see how much food is in there. When we grow trees, we need to grow fruit trees, things that we can eat, nuts, anything that is viable, that's going to help the environment and that is sustainable. So I would definitely make a motion. Before that, I just wanted to thank Jim, Olivia, and Terry and welcome them to our sustainability board, because this is a fun board. It's not so fun right now, as you can tell, but it's going to be, and we're going to get back to the real world eventually. And thank you very much for Courtney. A fantastic presentation. I definitely thank you for that. And I've been on some of those boards in the and listening to, you know, what's going on. If you haven't noticed, I grew up here, and global rising and sea level rise is definitely here. And we have to prepare ourselves for it. And so thank you for that. And but I definitely want to make a motion to KBB, which is awesome, to change the time, because of course it is way too hot to plant anything right now. So definitely in the fall to plant things. But what kind of trees, Nick, are we planting?
Well, they're all natives, of course. We have few varieties of oak, a couple magnolias. All the trees were vetted through the KBB process through Sally Scalera at UF IFAS Extension. And I don't have the tree list right in front of me right now, but I'm pretty sure that there's a couple of oaks, some Jamaican capers, white stopper maybe. Like I said, the two big magnolias, and all native plants. No fruit-bearing trees though. Dave, we did talk about fruit-bearing trees as part of this, but the maintenance issue with some of those and pest issues around City Hall, we went away from that. However, you know, in the future, I think fruit trees for residents are great. Getting those in people's homes. I did speak with a local nursery that's kind of popping up next to Bagel World. I don't know if you know the guys over there at Banana Nursery, but they're going to be doing a lot of that. So empowering, you know, folks like them, I think might be a good step with that. But for this project, no fruit-bearing trees, all natives, and there's about 30 different trees that we are looking at as part of this.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. And, you know, for folks who are new to the board, Dave and Member Fergus are our longstanding leaders who've been with this board and responsible for many of the great outcomes and where we are today. So appreciate you chiming in, Dave. You waited, like, you know, all your inspiration, leaving us till the end. Come on.
Told you I was holding my breath.
I know, why? It was a perfect time.
I'm in Charleston.
Oh, that's why. Well,
I was
oh,
wondering.
yeah, it's the beauty of this online thing. All the kinds of benefits we can still get you when you're out of state. So, well, I love the, you know, I'm on the food forest idea. Actually, I mean, as we're talking about events and things like that, and the after the hurricane season and planting, you know, the pandemic has caused tons of people to embrace gardening, because when you're home, that's something you can do. Maybe you didn't realize it, but even since the pandemic, I have planted, I will say, 2 avocados, a cherry tree, and a lime and a lemon. Just, you know, I'm not sure if that would have all gotten done otherwise, but it did. So I'm with you with the food forest. I think we should bring that back up when we talk about the tree planting, just with like residents, as Nick is saying. So.
Can I
Okay.
chime in just randomly, Jen? You see,
Yeah, go for it.
cherry trees will bear fruit here?
Well, you know, I went to Rockledge Gardens. We had talked to them a lot before and just locally. And there's some actually. There's Brazilian. I think we got a Brazilian cherry, and then there's what is the name of this cherry? It's sort of sour and sweet, and it's been doing great around the streets where I live. There's a few neighbors who've got these robust cherry trees that are just going crazy. So a couple varieties.
Yeah, if you could send me the names of those varieties, I'd love it.
Sure. Yeah, will do.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got plant recommendations, so much information here. So let's see. Are we to the adoption of minutes? Are we there? Well, even virtually we go 2 hours. Can you believe it?
Well, the Barbados cherry
Yes, that's
is
the one.
It's equivalent to eating 22 oranges. It's the highest vitamin C fruit. It's easy to grow, it's sustainable, and you get tons of beautiful fruit from it. And they're actually delicious. And there's 3 little pits inside them. That's it. But they're super juicy. And you'll have so many that you'll share with your neighbors.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you very much.
I think they're high in potassium too. It was some kind of superfood like conversation I had. So I mean, if you're thinking pandemic, I need beans. I need high potassium cherries.
You definitely need avocados. The 2 kinds are Simmons and the Haas. And the Haas are awesome and they're super delicious. And you can sustain yourself on water and avocados.
Yep. We're going to be well fed during the sea level rise on this island. Okay. So let's see, any other comments, board member comments? All right. Then we have the minutes. Is that right, Julie?
Yeah, I just need a motion and a second.
I'll move to adopt.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Steve Gillum? Oh, can everyone unmute?
Oh, yeah. I also might have one correction, and I can't believe I don't remember this.
You can email it to me.
Okay, I think it was just the vice
Julie,
chair.
I would recommend during a motion just to ask the amount of people who don't approve.
Oh, okay. Rather than roll call? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Any nays? Beautiful. Jen, just forward me your thought whenever you think of it, okay?
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, any other comments? With that, we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Great to see and hear you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Jennifer, excellent job. Excellent.
Thank you. Nice to meet everyone.
Yeah,
Yeah,
nice
yeah.
to meet you too.
Welcome, James, Olivia, and
Great job,
Terry.
Jules.
Welcome.
Talk
Thank
to
you,
you
darling.
soon.
See y'all soon.
Bye.
Ah.
Bye,
Bye.
Jim.